Hey guys, welcome to the Bill Barnwell Show. I am Bill Barnwell. Today it is our annual one review show, figuring out what actually mattered from the first week of the NFL season. And joining me to do that, as we have on every year on the Bill Barnwell Show for this week one episode, is the person who, to me, does the best job on a weekly basis, not just for week one, but for every week of the NFL season, of breaking down what mattered and did not matter when it comes to a fantasy football perspective, and frankly, a real-life perspective as well. I learned a lot about what I actually saw from the football field on Sundays and Mondays and Thursdays and occasionally Fridays as well from reading this man's work. He publishes one of the best newsletters in the business, the Stealing Signals newsletter. Joining me today is my friend Ben Gretch. Gretch, how are you?
I'm better after that intro. That was just far too kind. The best breakdown. You always make me feel so great. I love joining you for this show.
Yeah, it is I think it's such a useful show to me because I'm still figuring this stuff out as well. Like, I'm doing some of the same things you are. I'm watching the All-22. I'm looking at the numbers. I'm trying to figure out, okay, how much of what I saw in week one was a fluke and how much of it was really meaningful. And I wrote about this a little bit in my Monday morning column this week, sort of talking about like what I saw that I felt was really tangible, what was less tangible. But I am not by any means a totally reliable source. And there are things, like maybe the Colts offense, which I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit today, where I was very skeptical when I sort of initially looked at what I saw, and then maybe on second glance, I was a little more optimistic. The Dolphins offense, to flip it, maybe I was a little skeptical or a little worried coming out of that first game. Maybe the second look, maybe I'm not quite as concerned as I was previously. We'll talk about a lot of the games we saw on Sunday. Ben, I want to hit on a lot of the things you hit on in your newsletter this week and what stood out to you as meaningful and not meaningful. But just before we start, can you give the listeners who have not heard you or read your newsletter before just some perspective on like what sort of things you're looking at to try and ascertain what is sort of legit and not legit from week one?
Yeah, so I watch all the games, and not all the games at once, but individually, go through all the plays. I think it's really helpful to watch the games individually as opposed to, obviously Red Zone and those things are super fun, but to really break through all the games, and then I'm going through all the key stats. From a fantasy football lens, you want to know about usage. You want to know about snap shares, the route shares for the receivers early in the year, the targets, the volume. In week one, a massive thing that I'm looking at is how the teams looked, how aggressive they were, how pass heavy they were. I love the pass rate over expected number. And so we're trying to figure out, based on an expected pass rate, which is going to be, relative to game situation and score and all those things, how aggressive teams were. Like the Chargers were a very fascinating one in week one. Highest pass rate over expected. Even though they led, they threw to win against the Chiefs. Very, very fun game from them in Brazil. And so looking at all of those team level things and figuring out what I think is, signal and noise, as I like to break it down at Stealing Signals. And then looking at all the player stuff and the usage and how the offenses looked and how they were able to execute what their game plans were and even what their game plans were, because they obfuscate so much throughout August. It's so nice to see in week one them come out and try to execute something, and we get to learn like this is what they want to be. This is what they're trying to be when the lights come on. And yet week one is still in some ways the fourth preseason game. So we don't know for sure if this is where they're going to evolve to, because teams do grow throughout the season. As you said, none of this is certain after 1 week, but it's so fun to break down.
Yeah, and I do think, even though we're not going to be 100% sure about everything from week one, I think knowing when to be aggressive, when to be conservative, when to treat something as sort of a fluke, whether to treat something as something more significant is really valuable. I go back to the year Puka Nacua broke out, right? If you saw week one and you said, it's just one crazy week from a guy who's not going to be, doing that every week, you would have missed out on maybe adding someone in free agency in your fantasy league who would have won you your league that year potentially. It is, sort of knowing when to strike is as valuable as sort of knowing what to discount as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's my big introduction to the post this year was about this idea of overreacting after week one, but also underreacting. You want to react to the right amount. It's a little Goldilocks thing, right? You need to be willing to analyze and parse and consider the stuff that is going to be sticky and the stuff that's not going to be sticky. And that's the key with it.
Yeah, so we're going to hit on teams and players today, sort of go in vaguely chronological order throughout most of the games we saw on Sunday. But you started with a team I really want to discuss because I think they are such a fascinating disconnect between maybe what's underneath the hood and what the public perception is of that team. And that is the Los Angeles Chargers, where, as you mentioned, in a close game with the Chiefs, where they were ahead for I believe they were tied or ahead for the entire game, if I'm not mistaken, but never got too far ahead. They were still really within, one score, making it pretty close. The Chiefs, obviously, we know they can make magic happen late in games. You're never really away from the Chiefs until the game is over. But they were a very aggressively pass-happy offense in this game in week 1. And when you watch the broadcast of the game, there was really a perception of, oh, wow, we're almost shocked that the Chargers are throwing the football this much. Do you feel like what we saw in week 1 is an outlier versus what we saw from them last season? Do you feel like, with some perspective, maybe a closer look, this is sort of in line with what they were doing last season? And are the Chargers going to be this sort of pass-first team in neutral scripts over the course of 2025?
Well, that's the big question. I mean, this is a really fascinating one because they were 29th in plays, 28th in pass attempts last year, in large part because they were dead last in pace, in seconds to snap. And I do think they will probably still work with a little bit more of a deliberate pace. But you had Justin Herbert really banged up all of last year, and they talked all offseason about how they wanted to use his legs a little bit more, that he's healthy. Jim Harbaugh. I always get the Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh always talks about Justin Herbert like he's the greatest thing that's ever played football, right? And so he talks about him like they really... so it's not a surprise that they go and they play the Chiefs. And so how much of this plays into the Chiefs, I think, is really important. Who the opponent was and all of that. Because it's not a surprise that when they go and play the Chiefs, they decide, hey, we're going to put the game on Justin Herbert's shoulders. We have Najee Harris didn't practice all August. We have a rookie running back. We're not going to try and establish the run here. We're going to let Justin Herbert win the game for us. We think so highly of him. So from that perspective, week 1 could just be a little bit of an outlier for what they eventually become. And I do think it's going to trend back that way. But it was such a big shift from what they were last year. To be the number 1 team in pass rate over expected, like I said, to be at plus 15%, which is really, really high. The second highest team is about plus 10% last week. The full season numbers from last year, when you're averaging all the different games, you usually see the league leaders be in the 6 to 8% range. 15%, we're way out there. And so they're not going to be this pass heavy every game. And yet being this pass heavy, you're like, man, if they could just wind up in the plus 3% range, it's a very different offense. It's an offense that's going to be aggressive and be fun for its receivers. And it does seem like that's probably where they're going to head. It seems like they want to win through Justin Herbert. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, they did run the ball last year, but it was really when they were playing from ahead, when they were in situations where maybe it was more about running the clock and about sort of exhausting the opposing team versus trying to maximize their offensive efficiency. And I think you bring up a really good point about the Chiefs. I mean, this is a situation where even if you don't think they're going to win 100% of their close games, they're the zombies of the NFL. They're undead. You can't kill them even if you get a leader in a situation where you're going to win late. And so I do think it's fascinating to think about how the Chargers might have approached this game, thinking we have to put it on Justin Herbert's shoulders. We can't really stop trying to score in this game because we know if we leave it late for Patrick Mahomes in a 1-score game, he's going to rip off a 50 or whatever yard pass to Marquise Brown, streaking downfield totally uncovered. That could have been a game, I believe a game-tying touchdown in that moment. I believe they were down 7, if I'm not mistaken. So I do want to see what happens in the weeks to come, where, as you said, they are going to have, hopefully, a healthier Najee Harris to figure in, and if not be the lead back, at least be part of the rotation at running back, and maybe be in situations where, if they're playing the Raiders, if they're playing the Broncos, they feel a little more confident that those teams are not going to have late comebacks on offense to fuel the game, so they might be lean a little more on the rushing attack to sort of keep that going. But it does feel like everything they tell us, and like you said, everything Jim Harbaugh tells us is that he thinks Justin Herbert is the best quarterback in football. And if they're going to tell us that, I think having even 1 week where they're going to run a plus 15% pass rate over expectation tells us, no, we're going to lean into this guy and we need to. We think he can be the MVP. We're going to let him play like he's the MVP in the way that the Bills let Josh Allen play in those situations, the way that the Chiefs let Patrick Mahomes play in those situations. And so I do think it is, even if they're not going to be plus 15% every week, the fact that they were plus 15% in week 1 tells us that's within their range of possibilities. They might do that 3 or 4 more times over the course of the year, and that could be a pretty significant difference between, what other teams might not be willing to do with their quarterbacks.
Yeah, and they were using him in the run game. I didn't look at the design run charting, but I think there was a couple design runs in there. He ends up with 7 carries for 32 yards, a couple scrambles as well. But the mobility aspect that they talked about was there. I mean, they were pretty straightforward. They didn't lie about any of this. This is what they want to put the game on Justin Herbert's shoulders, like the Bills do with Josh Allen, like the Ravens do with Lamar Jackson, like the Chiefs typically do with Patrick Mahomes. And it makes sense. Usually when teams are telling you the thing and it also makes sense, and it's like, yeah, that's what I would do if I was coaching the team, like then I believe it's going to be probably signal there.
Yeah, and I think just, like I said, having it as a possible outcome, as one of the range of possibilities, changes things a little bit for how I would evaluate the Chargers and their offense moving forward. Flip it to the Chiefs side of things. Obviously, they were not expecting to lose Xavier Worthy on the first series of this game to a Travis Kelce headshot, or not a headshot, but a Travis Kelce body shot, which then knocked Xavier Worthy out of that game as they were trying to cross on mesh. But after that, we saw Marquise Brown get, I believe, 16 targets in this game. He got like the wide receiver 1 usage with one of the 4 best quarterbacks in football in a team that throws the ball a ton. Like, in some circles, if Xavier Worthy had been there and Marquise Brown had gotten 16 targets, we'd be sitting here like, oh my God, Hollywood Brown is suddenly like, the potential featured wide receiver on this great offense. And yet, it does feel like that's a little bit reliant on Worthy going out unexpectedly early in this game, no?
Yeah, I mean, they talked about it on the broadcast, and I always love the notes we get during broadcasts from the production meetings, because you have the coaches spending the whole week building up, planning out this game plan and trying to make it as, they're trying to not let the opponent know anything about it, right? They're trying to, as private and as unknown. And then the night before, they do the production meetings, and they share a lot of this stuff, and they don't mind sharing it because they know that the production team is helping them do a better broadcast, but during the game, all this stuff's going to become clear anyway. At this point, you no longer need to hide it. And so the production team will often talk about the things that the coaches told them, what their game plan was, and you're like, yeah, this is what I'm seeing, but it confirms that this is what they were thinking all week as well when they were building the game plan. And Rich Eisen asked Kurt Warner sometime in, I think about the third quarter, is this just a week 1 thing with the Chiefs offense not looking great? And Warner said something like, it could be week 1, or it could be the fact that Xavier Worthy went out on the third play. They told us they basically built the whole game plan around him this week. And that's sort of what we saw with Hollywood Brown, was that he was really taking that over. 12 of those 16 targets were first reads. I don't think anything like that would have been the case if Worthy was actually playing. That seemed like the clear adjustment to the fact that Worthy was not there. And just look at the first couple of plays. I mean, they give a handoff to Worthy, and then they're trying to run that mesh concept. And I think they were going to go to Worthy underneath there probably if Travis Kelce doesn't get pushed by Derwin James and then blow up Xavier Worthy. So I think Worthy was going to be a really featured player. If he's out, though, I do think Hollywood Brown's going to have to try to fill that role.
Yeah, I mean, stylistically, it makes sense, right? Like, we're not subbing in, flip it to the other side. Keenan Allen is not a good Quentin Johnston comparable, maybe, or, KLS might be a better replacement for if Quentin Johnston, if he couldn't go. Hollywood Brown, I mean, he's an undersized, fast receiver. He is good after the catch when he's healthy, obviously can separate. Xavier Worthy, I think, is a more complete player and maybe a player with more upside, but I do think that you can sort of vaguely see, we could sort of sub Hollywood Brown in here, and if Xavier Worthy is going to be the focal point of the offense, we could make it work with Hollywood Brown instead. And there's not really, I guess Tyquan Thornton could be sort of in that role, but it kind of felt like maybe Tyquan got the Hollywood role and Hollywood got the Xavier Worthy role. And we'll have to see how it works in a couple of weeks. Obviously, Xavier Worthy has said he wants to play in a brace. We'll see if he's able to play at 100%. Certainly, it feels like the Chiefs would not be as aggressive building the offense around him if they're concerned that he's not going to be able to play a full complement of snaps, or maybe not be as effective as he would be were he to be healthy. So yeah, it does feel like there's even if you're not getting 16 targets, it does feel like there's an opportunity here with, Hollywood Brown not being, I think he's probably available in a few leagues here or there, but certainly a guy where I think it's easy to say, that was just 1 week, but it could be meaningful for weeks to come.
Yeah, but it's also probably not great for the Chiefs offense, who, they had this last year. All their offseason was spent around trying to build out a deeper skill position group, and then they lose Rashee Rice early in the season. Well, Hollywood Brown first, and then Rashee Rice, and then they're basically just down to a 21-year-old rookie in Xavier Worthy. This year they have Rashee Rice on suspended, and Travis Kelce another year older, and Xavier Worthy goes out right away, and so now they're down both the guys that I think they want to build the passing offense around. If Worthy does play, all of the docs out there are talking about a high rate of re-injury risk, which is really concerning for me, especially for a vertical receiver who, you make long catches, you come down hard on those shoulders sometimes. Probably doesn't see as many of those deep shots. I probably would expect those to go more towards the Tyquan Thornton or whatever. Thornton to me was kind of running the Justin Watson role from last year, that rotational deep threat. And probably would have been what Hollywood Brown was doing in this game had Worthy been active for the entire game, obviously. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. I do think, with Worthy, as you said, a higher upside than what Brown brings to the Chiefs offense. And that's what they're hoping for from this year 2 player, fastest guy in combine history, all of these elements, that he's breaking out in a way that is looking more like what Tyreek Hill used to be for this offense than what Hollywood Brown's going to be able to do. So Brown's going to try to do a facsimile of what they were hoping to get out of Worthy. I know there's a lot of people that were skeptical of Worthy as well. I was one who was very much in his camp. And I do think it hurts the Chiefs quite a bit to not have that ceiling element there, that upside that he could bring. Yeah,
and it gives you some level of stability as well, because we know Hollywood Brown is not exactly the most healthy and reliable player at wide receiver of any league either. So, having Xavier Worthy compromised or out means you're now relying on Hollywood Brown, who might very well himself get injured in the weeks to come. But certainly feels like the Chiefs have to figure out what their offense looks like without maybe a completely healthy Xavier Worthy. The Falcons, I wanted to move on to them. Top of drafts this year, a little more muddled maybe at the 1-1 than years past, depending on, of course, your league and your format. Felt like Jamar Chase was a pretty reliable pick. Could make justifications for a lot of different players. Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Saquon Barkley, even Christian McCaffrey maybe. And then Bijan Robinson figuring in as well. And the big first week of the season, at least in terms of production, belonged to Bijan Robinson. A long catch for a touchdown, involved in the pass game, certainly a significant role on the ground as well. Do you feel differently about Bijan after week 1 than you did heading into the season? Do you feel like maybe you wish you had been higher on Bijan Robinson, or do you feel like maybe that one long catch is maybe influencing things a little more than it should?
Well, that's a really important catch, because he didn't have a play of 40-plus yards last year. Still to this point does not have a rush of 40-plus yards. He had a 71-yard TD catch in his rookie season, and that was his one really explosive play. And then he has a 50-yard TD in week 1. As far as just trying to parse these really dynamic first-round type fantasy players, that was part of it for me when I'm thinking through. It's like Saquon Barkley was hitting on 50-yard touchdowns every week last year. Jahmyr Gibbs has this explosive ability that I have no questions about. Bijan Robinson going out and having a 50-yard touchdown on a reception in week 1 and looking really good with the ball in his hands, weaving through the Bucs defense. And we all know that he had the athleticism and the playmaking and all of that stuff, but it's just nice to see that immediately. It did elevate my opinion of him and alleviate some concerns about that element of his profile, that he hasn't been doing that. And I do think, if you go back and you look at the numbers late last year when Penix took over, the ability to have a quarterback that could push the ball downfield, which Cousins really struggled with last year, had a huge impact on Bijan. He had over 90 rushing yards and 2 rushing TDs in all 3 of Penix's starts. It really opened things up that you now have a quarterback who's able to attack a little bit. We saw that on that play. You can attack vertically, and then you're able to throw to the flat and get Bijan into space, and he does the rest. And so that was fantastic. He gets all 7 of the running back targets. All of that was great. A little concerned on the other side that he only gets a 12-10 rush attempt edge over Tyler Algier, and they split the green zone touches inside the 10-yard line. They each get 2 of those. That's not what we saw a lot last year, and it's not something that I was anticipating, that he would give up some of the green zone and touchdown equity. But at the same time, I do think that's probably more fluky, more noise from week 1. That's not going to be the way that they're going to do things. They were using Algier to spell Robinson, in part because he was getting a lot of catches early in this game and very involved in the pass game. I think he's going to be their guy in the red zone. Because he is their guy, period. He's so dynamic. Yeah.
Right. The context matters there, right? I think there are certain teams where their running back splits are dependent on just who's in the field. They'll rotate guys from drive to drive. I haven't looked too closely, but it kind of felt like the Vikings maybe with Jordan Mason and Aaron Jones. That was more of a possession to possession or series to series things. We're going to rotate these guys in or out. Certain teams, I think about the Browns, who we're going to get to in a second maybe. The Browns had their fullback come in short yardage to sort of plunge in for a touchdown. That's a more significant defined role. It's hard to imagine that they would really see it as, a situation where we have to take Bijan Robinson off of the field in the green zone, that we're better off with Tyler Algier. Tyler Algier is going to get touches. He's a useful player, and they're going to rotate their backs. It's very clear, but it just feels like that's not a split that you would expect to be likely to keep up in the weeks.
And at the end of the day, Bijan Robinson played 83% of the snaps. So, that's a huge number right there.
Yeah, definitely feels like you have to be really excited if you're a Bijan Robinson drafter after week one, because the one thing, like you said, it's been missing has been the explosive plays. It's not like, who do I want to pick on and be mean about here? Travis Kelce. Things are going well for Travis Kelce. We can make fun of Travis Kelce a bit. Travis Kelce having a 37-yard touchdown on a design screen and go. It's not like Travis Kelce was separating because he was a great athlete at this point of his career. That's a schemed up touch. Bijan Robinson he just ran away from a Bucs linebacker and nobody could even get close to him. That is, I think, the real Bijan Robinson. And we get 5-6 of those. So for the course of the year, that's running back one, league winner, 101 kind of production. And Absolutely. He has that in his range of possibilities, even if we haven't seen it so far in 2 years of football. Bengals Browns, a player I feel like you, in reading the majority of the column this week, it feels like a guy you really were sort of seeing as someone to target and be aggressive about, was Harold Fannin, the rookie tight end for the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, he's so fun, right? I was drafted him in the last round of so many of the different leagues, because you have this profile coming out of college. Production in college tends to be more predictive for the receiving weapons, more predictive than like athleticism or different things, right? And we've talked about this in the past years and those things. And so I get pretty excited about the unique production profiles. Fannin led all of FBS in receptions last year, even receivers. Led I think in yards as well. Just had a monster production season for Bowling Green as a tight end. The thresholds for tight end production in college are lower. You don't usually see these kinds of production metrics. And people say, well, it was at Bowling Green. Well, they went to Penn State, on the road at Penn State, a college football playoff team later last season. And Fannin had like 150 yards in a game where they threw for like 250 and didn't run the ball, and they lost by 7 points. They were competitive with Penn State entirely through Harold Fannin, and this college football playoff level team couldn't stop Harold Fannin. And then the very next week they went to Texas A&M, played an SEC team, and lost by 6. Bowling Green almost upset 2 Power 2 conference teams, right? And in both cases, Fannin had like 150 yards, and the rest of their pass game had like 100 yards, and their running game had like under 100 yards total. Mm-hmm. It was all Harold Fannin, and so you're gonna miss me a little bit with the level of competition stuff. It doesn't really show up when you dig into what he actually did in college, and so you have this crazy production profile, and the idea that people talk about how he runs duck-footed and all this stuff, but regardless of what he is or how he runs or how he looks, if he's able to use his specific abilities to put production on the field, that tends to translate to the next level. They took him in the high 3rd round. I think a lot of people don't realize how strong the draft capital was, because several tight ends went in the late 2nd round. So you had Mason Taylor and Elijah Arroyo and all these guys going off before Fannin. But Fannin going on day 2 in the first few picks of the 3rd round was really, really strong draft capital and buy-in for a guy whose profile coming out of a small school was a little bit uncertain and unique. And they were like, no, we really like this guy. We like what he brings. They've talked about it all offseason. He played a lot with Njoku in this game, and he's a different type of tight end. Njoku's more of an inline tight end. Fannin's a little bit more of like a move tight end, maybe a slot receiver to some degree. Gets several targets. The play that I was really impressed on was one where Flacco is rolling out right and rolling, and because he's Joe Flacco, it's taking him a really long time to get to the sideline, and he's looking back to the middle field, looking around, and Fannin was near the sideline on his short right, and he's rolling toward him, and Fannin breaks upfield. And they always talk about the receivers that make themselves more present for a receiver, come back, or for a quarterback, come back to the ball, get open, find space. When this one, Fannin breaks toward the space downfield, and Flacco finally comes back to him, throws, the defender's now trailing, back turned, throws it right over the defender's back shoulder, and Fannin's able to make a nice little catch on an extended play. And you can just tell from, Flacco, who's been around for so long, a 40-year-old, immediately seeing what he has here in this 21-year-old rookie, that this guy's going to go find space. He's going to keep working on the route. He's going to get open. That's the stuff that shows up in the production in college. That's the stuff that is going to immediately ingratiate him to his teammates and make him a top target for Flacco. I don't know that, I guess the way that I'm envisioning what happens with Harold Fannin is I don't want to make too many specific predictions. I think in fantasy football, you want to deal with uncertainty favorably and think about a range of outcomes and all of those types of things. But what we have is a rookie that now has checked every box. They gave him the great draft capital. They gave him all the great camp reports. They sat him in the preseason with the starters, right? They told you they wanted to use him, and then they used him a ton in week one. He runs 63% routes. That's not a massive number, but he gets 9 targets, 30% targets per route, all of that. And then he's efficient on it as well. All of that very, very favorable for the way that his rookie season will go. We typically see rookie usage scale up throughout the year. So when you see this in week one, you're thinking, okay, he's going to be able to run more routes in the future in other games. It may go up and down a little bit. It does for rookies. He may have some games where he's at 50% routes, and that will be a little disappointing. Sure. And he won't have 30% targets per route every game, probably, but he might. If someone's going to do it, it's going to be the guy who caught the most passes in college football last year. So I can talk about Harold Fannin, Bill, for all day. He's a very, very unique profile. What we're doing in fantasy football is looking for outliers, these league winners, these guys that just break molds, not aggregating all the stats to find things that are like a cohort of players or something, and it rounds all the edges of the uniqueness of the different profiles. This is an outlier. This is a unique profile, and you need to address it as such. I love playing into Harold Fannin right now.
Yeah, I mean, 2 things I'd add. I agree with everything you said. Number one, the fact that he could even separate downfield on a scramble drill. Not a lot of tight ends can do that, Yeah. And I don't want to pick on Travis Kelce again, but the older version of Travis Kelce, the Travis Kelce from 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, he was able to do that. Brock Bowers last year. I mean, Brock Bowers got a ton of first 3 targets in the structure of the offense. He had a lot of big plays last year that were scramble drills where he was able to separate from coverage because there was a linebacker or a safety who was just tired. He had covered him for 5 seconds, and Brock Bowers was able to get to space, get open, and those led to a lot of big plays for Brock Bowers last season. Having a tight end who can do that is rare. And then, I mean, the bar for tight ends is just not very high, where even if he doesn't have, even if he is at a 50% route share or 50% route rate over the rest of the season, that could still be really valuable given how inconsistent, given how difficult tight ends can be to put up significant, consistent production. So it does feel like that's a really exciting opportunity because he's a guy who is going to be available in a lot more leagues. He is a guy who does have a lot of upside, and we'll see what happens with the Browns offense. Obviously, I mean, who knows what they're going to do at quarterback, and that could be a mess from week to week, but it does feel like there's an opportunity to get a guy who could be a starting tight end for you as the season goes along.
And to that point, they are going a little bit youth movement there in Cleveland. Yeah. And Njoku on the last year of his deal. I mean, if you add Fannin, even if the usage isn't great, I'd want to hold him at least through the trade deadline because there's the possibility here that if Njoku got moved the second half of the season for Fannin, those routes could be very high.
Yeah, for sure. Moving on to a situation that's already evolved since we saw Sunday's games, the Jacksonville Jaguars and their backfield. This was another situation that I think we were all trying to figure out over the course of the offseason. We didn't know who was going to be maybe you knew. I didn't know who was going to be the feature back. There was different reports at different times. They obviously used the day 2 pick on BHL Tuden. It's sort of easy to plug him in as, he's going to be the Bucky Irving that Liam Cohen targeted. Okay, nothing wrong with that idea. There's reports during camp. They love Tank Bigsby. Tank Bigsby is going to be the guy. And now Tank Bigsby is a member of the Philadelphia Eagles. And then on Sunday, it was Travis Etienne, the former first-round pick who had struggled the last couple of years. He was the featured back. Hit a big run, I think over 70-yard run in this game. Gets a significant workload, leads the way. Do you feel like you have a good handle on this backfield now, especially after Bigsby's been traded, or do you still feel like there's more up in the air that we sort of know less than maybe it seems after their Week 1 win over the Carolina Panthers?
No, I do feel like I have a good handle on this backfield now. And I mean, I was nervous with all the very positive reports from Bigsby, but I had been kind of pitching the approach to this backfield as fade Tank Bigsby, basically. You're going to probably see a lot of ETN early and Bashal Tutin's profile.
Ben, you're setting up for Saquon Barkley injury and Tank Bigsby RB1 on the Eagles offense.
That's right. Bashal Tutin had such a fun profile that again, you want to play the rookies for the late season upside, and so it felt like. And to me, the ETN thing, he was not as productive last year, but he was hurt. And it's this long view thing that I like to talk about, where this is a former first-round pick, strong production profile. The 2 years prior, 1,400-plus yards. He's not old yet or anything. Bigsby, not as strong of a prospect, really poor rookie year. And then some interesting stuff last year, but I thought there was some context there where if you really parsed it, I thought ETN's just a better player from a long view perspective, and I think that's what the Jaguars decided. But this is a backfield you want to target because of what Liam Cohen is and how he coaches, what he was able to do in Tampa last year. It wasn't a surprise that Bucky Irving was so good, and Bucky Irving was so good in addition to the fact that Rachaad White had a bunch of production. He tied for the league lead in receiving touchdowns among
Sean Tucker
RBs.
Was like a RB1 or RB2 one week.
That's right. Sean Tucker has the massive week, but White had 6 receiving TDs in addition to everything Bucky did last year. So you want access to that type of backfield. And one of the things that was fascinating, one of the league-wide trends I want to ask your opinion on, because I'm fascinated by, is that there were 32 running backs who had 10-plus carries in Week 1, and 25 of them were below 4.0 yards per carry. There was a ton of these running backs that were not able to find any room. And what we saw last year was, as past defenses want to take away explosives, cover 2 shell, all of these things, the run D seemed to lack a little bit, and a lot more explosive runs and a lot more space for a lot of these running backs. Week 1, it was like, no, the defenses are just getting even better. We're taking away explosives from the downfield stuff, and we're going to turn Jalen Hurts into a check down or scramble quarterback, and some of these guys can't push the ball vertically at all, and we're going to take away the explosives from Saquon Barkley. That's kind of how it looked for the Eagles, for example. That's bizarre to me that all of those things can happen at once from whatever the defenses are doing. I love this, push and pull between the offenses and defenses. I don't understand the X's and O's very well, but I love the meta of it. It's just exciting to think about. But the Jaguars were one team where all 4 running backs who got a carry had positive rushing yards over expectation from NFL Pro. ETNs are through the roof. You mentioned a 70-yard run. They get him into space, and obviously some of that is on him as well. But Bigsby had a positive number. LaQuint Allen got a couple carries. Bashal Tutin on his little bit of usage. Now, LaQuint Allen comes in this game before Bashal Tutin. He's another rookie. He's a more limited prospect, but a good receiving prospect. They played him on long down and distance situations, third down situations. Almost all of his snaps came in the very specific role. You're going to see him on those situations, it seems like, but I don't believe he's a real threat to Tutin in terms of the long-term upside, the handcuff value, if you will, if something were to happen to ETN. So as far as having a grasp on what this offense will be going forward, or this backfield, I think you're going to have ETN as the clear lead right now. He's the veteran. He's the guy that is their former first-round pick, is very talented, does do a lot of things, and had a great Week 1. And they're going to continue to lean into that. But I think this trade is really about opening up Bashal Tutin, who's a guy they really loved. When James Gladstone came over, he talked about this later after the draft. When he came over as the new GM, in his interview, he highlighted Bashal Tutin as one of the types of guys that if he got the job, they'd be looking at in day 3 because of the elements of his profile that are so exciting. Explosive runner, great 40 time, missed tackles force and evasion rate through the roof, very exciting player, one of the fastest running backs in this class. And then they went and took him on day 3, but they took him like the second pick of day 3. Like they were like, yeah, okay, we've waited long enough. I told you guys this is like a good value pick. We'll get him on day 3, but we've waited long enough. We're taking him right away in round 4. They really like Bashal Tutin. LaQuint Allen went a little bit later. They like him as well. He's going to play a specific pass down role, like I said. ETN's your starter. Bashal Tutin is your now backup in the Tank Bigsby role with the upside, I think, to take over the backfield. If he starts to make some really exciting plays, he's the guy that, if he's available in your fantasy league, you want to stash him. He's maybe the best stash in the entire NFL.
Yeah, I mean, really significant upside there. I I'm going to give you a pithy answer, and then I'll give you a real answer, Ben. Why did the Jaguars have more explosive runs and impressive run day than 31 other teams? Well, unfortunately, 31 other teams did not get to play the Carolina Panthers last week, Ben. I do think that made a bit of a difference. That is a really bad run defense. But I do think, like you said, there's a really smart architect when it comes to the run game in Tampa Bay and Liam Cohen. We saw them, in Carolina, in Jacksonville now. I'm getting my Florida cities confused. When last year when he was in Tampa Bay, we saw their run game take a major leap forward, in part because they added Graham Barden, who was an excellent offensive lineman, but also because I think everyone played better. They had a better scheme, and they got better angles for their run game. In the big picture, I'm not concerned yet. I want to see those explosives can vary from week to week. Big plays can pop open from game to game. I do think that, there's going to be some variance from week to week. If that's a trend, I do think it's going to be really interesting. I think defense is just a lot smarter now. They're a lot less static pre-snap. They're a lot less static post-snap. They're teaching defensive linemen, to play gap and a half more often now. I think that's more of a ubiquitous thing around the NFL. And so, it's harder to highlight your opportunities to hit holes. It's sort of, everything's a little more muddied now than maybe it was 5 or 10 years ago on both sides of the football, on offense and defense. Teams are really trying more aggressively to sort of mask what their intentions are pre and post snap. And so I just don't think the answers are quite as clear. I just don't think it's something where, if you're a Kyle Shanahan, you can't run outside zone 95% of the time anymore. Things have changed. Like, they have a much wider range of concepts to run because they know, like, we can't just run one thing over and over again. And I think on the defensive side as well, like, you can't just play classic Fangio light boxes up front. Maybe you can if you have the Eagles personnel, or if you have Aaron Donald with the Rams, but like, if you don't have just freak of freaks, like, you have to be willing to rotate guys. You have to be willing to lean into sort of, more confusion for the offense pre and post snap. You have to be willing to have players who can tackle. And I think tackling is really, teams are really good at tackling. Like, I know it's like a classic trope of like, oh, people don't know how to tackle anymore, their form's wrong. And there are plays where people are not good at tackling, but it is a league where I think people do tackle a lot better than people give them credit for. So it's not one thing, it's going to be a range of things, but I do want to see if that trend keeps up week after week here, and we don't see as many explosives as you might expect, especially in the run game, because we saw one from ETN and company last week. I have a player who does hit a lot of explosives typically and didn't hit one in week one, even though he had an enormous workload. And that's Christian McCaffrey, where came into the game, there was obviously the reports of the calf injury, real concerns about whether he was going to be able to play at all. And then not only did he play, but he had an enormous Christian McCaffrey-sized workload for the Niners. And like the Chiefs, there's fair questions about how did the George Kittle injury impact Christian McCaffrey's workload. Obviously, they have other players who are injured as well. But I want to ask you, given that you got the sort of dream workload for Christian McCaffrey, but didn't get the kind of efficiency we've seen from him in years past, how do you evaluate that moving forward? Do you see Christian McCaffrey as someone, if a Christian McCaffrey owner is suddenly terrified that they have a guy with a ticking time bomb of a calf, should you be trying to target him because he got such a heavy workload in week one, or is it sort of more complicated than that?
I think you want to target him. I wrote that he's probably the 101 now. I talked about, obviously, when you asked me, being more optimistic about Bijan, but to see McCaffrey after the calf scare come out and get 31 touches and get 12 high-value touches, which is my little stat I use, which is receptions plus the touches in the green zone inside the 10-yard lines, because that's where we, especially in PPR and half PPR, where we see the most running back fantasy scoring happen. You want the combination of receiving work and touchdown potential. McCaffrey gets 4 green zone touches. He catches 9 balls on 10 targets. He's going to catch so many balls now that Kittle's out. I mean, that's the one guy that is the other, big threat to catch a lot of the short area targets. And it looked like Pearsall is going to be a little bit more of the vertical guy. He had a 19.4 ADOT. Maybe they'll do more with Pearsall. And I know there's a lot of people who are really, really into Pearsall. I mean, I wasn't disappointed in Pearsall's week one. He has over 100 yards, but he had 2 catches on the first drive And Kittle goes out pretty early, and he doesn't have another catch. I don't think he had a catch in the second or third quarter. And then he comes back, has a long catch in the fourth. That was a big one and a key spot in the game for them. He has some big moments in this game, and I do think you have to be very optimistic about Pearsall. But I think people are going to want him to be more of a target dominant number one than I think he probably is based on the long view stuff, the profile coming out of college, the target earning, and really what he did last year. A lot of people pointed to what he did at the end of the season in a couple of games, but he had a stretch where he was playing a lot of snaps and not seeing targets last year. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, the gunshot and everything that impacted his rookie season needs to be mentioned, but Pearsall, I think, is going to be an important piece of their offense, but probably not a huge volume one, is sort of the point that I'm driving home. You have Juwan Jennings, looks like just a shoulder scare, probably not a long-term thing, but he's going to be there as well to earn some targets, but again, probably just provide cover vertically, and then you're going to get 30 touches for Christian McCaffrey every week. I mean, that's the only way that this can work right now. He didn't look great. He didn't have the explosives. Brian Robinson also didn't. I thought Brian Robinson looked meaningfully worse. They both had significant negatives in their rush yards over expected in those elements. I thought McCaffrey looked fine athletically in those things. He's so good as a route runner. He's basically a high-end slot receiver, and he just gets open. And so sometimes you worry about the target competition, whether teams are going to double team him, this and that. McCaffrey gets so many of those choice and option routes and wins on them against whoever's lined up on him that, I mean, Purdy's going to throw him 10 passes a game, and you're going to get so much volume. We've seen this story before with him. I'm not so worried about the efficiency when we know that everything's got to run through him. It's the injury, right? It's the injury history. It's the potential for an injury that could come down the line that is scary. But as far as the immediate usage and production, he's going to get all their green zone work. He's going to score touchdowns. His ceiling is so high, higher than anyone else in football.
Yeah, and I mean, just seeing the volume is such a huge plus because, again, there's just not every back in the NFL has a path that kind of volume because they're either not a good enough receiver or their teams want to rotate them, or, I mean, there's just not many backs in football who even in like a 90th percentile outcome can get the kind of volume opportunity Christian McCaffrey had in this game against, by the way, a very good Seahawks defense. Like, he's going to have easier games ahead against easier defenses in the weeks to come. So I totally agree. I think Christian McCaffrey it's risky, but like, you have to, there's no non-risky player at running back in the NFL. Like, you have to be willing to take a little bit of risk on to get the potential upside of a Christian McCaffrey. On the flip side of this game, something you pointed out that I didn't realize at first glance, and I feel like is totally true after reading what you said, was the role and the volume for Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And I guess I wanted to ask you, do you feel like, leaving someone like a Harold Fannin aside, where maybe that's more of a player who was like a late round pick, a waiver wire guy, in terms of like people who were being drafted in 100% of drafts, in the first half of drafts, did anybody sort of improve their stock or sort of improve their rest of season expectation in week one more to you than Jaxon Smith-Njigba?
Well, I was already pretty high on him, but I mean, probably no. I mean, there's a few other really exciting ones. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, I thought, we didn't know necessarily Chris Rodriguez is inactive, and then he goes out and he's that efficient. He has the long run. He has the TD. I mean, that's going to hit, right? Like, that's just clear that that's going to hit now. There's a few other guys as I'm scrolling through sort of the biggest signals in my Travis Etienne is another one. Obviously, we get to Tank Bigsby, but to your point, Jaxon Smith-Njigba was a massive story in week one. The 62% targets per route run is just so funny. A good targets per route run is like 30%. He got a target on over 60% of the routes that he ran. And the other part of this is it was at an ADOT of 13.7. The league-wide average for a receiver, about 11. The knock on him after his rookie year was all he got was low-level stuff. Last year, that ADOT rose a little bit, and I was like excited to be like, see, this is what we were talking about. This guy can do stuff down the field. For him to earn a target on 60% of routes and at an ADOT of 13.7, this massive 1.46 Whopper, which is the weighted opportunity rating stat from Josh Hermsmeyer that looks at your team share of targets and air yards, and that number is so much higher. Like, getting over 1 in that stat is massive, and he's at almost 1.5. Wow. And then he's also efficient on that. This is all like volume, but 9.5 yards per target, the after the target efficiency. But just in terms of what he was able to do from a route running perspective, you're seeing a guy who had really, really strong production at Ohio State. I remember that when he was coming out, that you had like Garrett Wilson say that between me and Chris Olave and him, he was the best on that team. He was and so JSN came out a year later than those guys, didn't really play in his final season at Ohio State. They had already both had good rookie years, and Garrett Wilson was saying JSN was the best of all of us. And he had the production the year prior when they were all on the field together. He was very, very productive. It's built a little bit at the pro level. He was a 21-year-old rookie. Sometimes it takes some time, right? Then a 22-year-old is a young guy. He's going into age 23. He looks like I wrote that he looks to me like a more athletic Keenan Allen, like prime Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen never was the most athletic guy, but was so good with the nuance in the route running at finding space and separation. When you saw some of the JSN routes this week, his ability to just do the little subtle movements to get the cornerback moving the direction he wants him to move so he can go the other way and create the space, so friendly to Sam Darnold in this play action pass game. The one issue with him and with Seattle in general is they didn't throw the ball a ton. They're not going to be a super pass heavy offense. You're going to see a limited number of passes probably overall. I don't have the specific negative 15.5% pass rate over expectation. I believe it was the lowest in the NFL. Very, very low. They tried to win by not throwing. They tried to win through running and defense, and that's I think what Mike McDonald wants to do. He wants to be a defensive coach. He's a very good defensive coach. He brought in Clint Kubiak to design a good run game. Mm-hmm. They didn't run the ball very well. And then when they threw off that, JSN was so dynamic. So maybe we'll see that shift back toward a little more passing, but that's the one concern.
Yeah, and we know play-action passing targets can be really efficient. They can be further downfield, and big surprise, really, coming out of week one. Clint Kubiak was the most play-action heavy coordinator in football the first 2 weeks of the year. Last year, pretty close with the Saints, and then didn't do that the rest of the year. And I kind of thought, Derek Carr was hurt, and the offensive line was banged up. Maybe they just didn't have the personnel to do it. Clint Kubiak does not call play action really at all week one. I think 2 snaps of play action in week one, and you have the head coach come out after the game. Mike McDonald comes out after the game and says, we need to use play action more. So I think that's only going to make life easier for Jaxon Smith-Njigba moving forward and create more explosive opportunities for him. Last game I wanted to ask you about as we finish up here, Ben, was the game of the week. Bills and Ravens, a total shootout, and maybe not a surprise. Like, I don't think we're going to sit here and be like, oh my God, Josh Allen can create explosives and Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, like, we know that already. I'm not going to ask you to break down those guys, but is there anyone from this game, either on the Bills side or the Ravens side, where you came out of it saying, wow, I didn't see that usage coming. I think that usage is going to stick, or something I found really meaningful and valuable to learn from how these two teams use their offensive playmakers in this game?
The two guys, one on each side, that were really exciting from that perspective to me were Zay Flowers and Keon Coleman. Yeah. Coleman didn't necessarily separate from Khalil Shakir and Josh Palmer. Those two guys both had 9 targets. He had 11. He had a little bit of a higher ADOT than Shakir, at least, and had more air yards and those things. I wrote that the Bills, this was a perfect game for Bills volume. They like to play a little bit slower under Joe Brady, but they got pushed by the Ravens, and the Ravens scored so fast. The Ravens did not have a single drive after the first quarter that took more than 2 minutes and 19 seconds of game clock. I don't think they ran I can't remember the exact stat, but I don't think they ran a drive in the entire second half that had more than 4 plays. They did not. I'm looking through my write-up here. Did not have a drive in the second half with more than 4 plays, but they still scored 21 second half points. They had 3 65-plus yard touchdown drives in under 4 plays. And that's the exact type of thing that both turns the ball back over to the Bills quickly, but also puts them behind the 8 ball, and they have to go and push and push and push. We see games shoot out. We talk about it in the DFS space. You want to shoot out like this. That's what we saw in this game, was the Ravens pushing the Bills and forcing them to run more and more and more plays and giving them the ball back quickly. And so they threw the ball an absolute ton. But Keon Coleman did look like a real number one in this game, and that was very exciting, I think, for his full season stuff. I just think for everyone there, you're going to see less overall volume most of the time. On the Bills side, it's probably Zay Flowers is the overall answer to this question. 9 targets in a game where Lamar only threw 19 passes, I believe it was, just a massive target share. 43% targets per route. You get they talked all offseason about with Zay Flowers, the ball in hand stuff. and the vertical route running, and how that helps them get the ball to him. When you listen to the Ravens talk all offseason about their offense and Todd Monken and them describe it, the one phrase that came up a lot was there's only one ball. They want to get it to everyone. They have a ton of efficient players. They'd love to throw to Mark Andrews more. They'd love to throw to Rashad Bateman more, who was very efficient last year. Once Isaiah Likely's back, they want to feature him more. They want to get the ball to DeAndre Hopkins a little bit, and he has a nice one-handed touchdown. Zay Flowers is a guy that when they talked about it, they did use this one ball thing, but one of the things Monken said at one point this offseason that sticks out to me a little bit is he said because of his ability with the ball in hand around the line of scrimmage and the vertical stuff, and because he can do so much stuff, it makes it easier to get him the ball in a lot of different ways. We saw that in this game. We saw the near the line of scrimmage ball in hand. We saw the vertical route running and separation, and then we saw the ball in hand down the field as well. He's so dynamic once he does have the ball, and I mean, that guy's going to be really, really good. I was a little concerned about the Ravens' overall pass volume and how it works with all these efficient players. I think after seeing week one, I'm like pretty out on Mark Andrews, who only ran 64% routes, even with Likely off. Pretty out on Bateman seeing enough volume, and pretty much like Zay Flowers is so good that he's got to be the guy that you want to target in this pass game.
Yeah, such an explosive player, and clearly someone they really value and prioritize there in Baltimore. Ben, we could do this for 32 teams. But you have other things to do with your life than sit here and basically explain how the NFL works to me. I feel like I always learn so much reading your stuff each and every week. Where can people check that out?
Yeah, it's Stealing Signal Substack. You can just go to bengretch.substack.com. Man, such a pleasure to get to talk with you. I love hearing all of your thoughts. You make me way smarter at it as well. Loved your week one column also, so people should check that out on ESPN. I really appreciate you having me on this